What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by TrueFan. Before we get into today's podcast with Jordan Hiley, there's a couple things that we need to go over first. Number one, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please consider leaving a rating and a review. The more positive ratings and reviews you get, the more it helps the people find the show and really helps to grow the community that we're developing. And if you're one of those people that have recently found the podcast, welcome. I'm very excited to have you here. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes. I put out brand new interviews every single Monday and a brand new takeaways episode every single Thursday where I sit down and break down the most recent podcast episode of the week. Also, if you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to share it to your Instagram story, tag myself at Jacob Kelly, tag Jordan at Make More Capital, and I'll feature you on my account and send you a message as well. And now, because we do talk about investing in financial information in this podcast, I do want to read a quick disclaimer. My Social Life podcast is not a registered investment, legal, tax advisor, or a broker/dealer. All investment and financial opinions expressed in this podcast are from the personal research and experience of each participant and are intended for entertainment and educational use only. Invest at your own risk. Now we have that out of the way, I finally am very excited to present to you my conversation with Jordan Hiley. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I am your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by TrueFan. And today we are joined by Jordan Hiley. And Jordan is the founder of Make More Capital. And he's on a mission to make investing easier for millennials and Gen Z by helping them understand the power of the eighth wonder of the world, compound interest, and by showing them how easy investing truly is. And I'm very excited to have you on the podcast today, Jordan. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Jacob.
My pleasure, man. I'm glad we were finally able to make this work. Where I want to start today, Jordan, I actually want to ask you the same question you asked the guest on your podcast. And I kind of want to use that as our roadmap for the rest of the podcast. So we're not going to directly be like, okay, moving on to like each thing that you invested in, but like we're going to kind of plant these seeds and we'll kind of reference them as we move throughout the podcast. So can you tell me about investments you've made, the best investment you've made in money, time, and resources?
Okay, gotcha. So, firstly, I just want to say thank you for having me as well. It's glad we can connect and I can share a bit more of my story, especially just a different look at money because a fresh perspective is always helpful. But so are you asking me for kind of like my updated version of the three questions I asked my guests?
Correct. Yeah. We'll use that kind of as like the roadmap through the podcast.
Sounds good. So I guess the first one we'll start with is essentially the investment I initially made with the investment I originally made in mutual funds with a financial advisor in Canada. So just for context, people that might not be aware, traditionally, how we invest in Canada, it's not something we're educated on in schools. Therefore, once people start making money, it's typical to go get a financial advisor. And people refer to this as their money guy. And really, though, what you find out when you dig a bit deeper is that this financial advisor with an O is really just a sales representative who's taken an exam and passed it, which allows them to sell products on behalf of the institution that they work for. I'm not going to name any big banks in Canada, but I'm sure you can all think of them or the financial services industries. So it was quite funny. So I'll have to take a step back because it's a long story. But 2014 to 2016, I taught English in South Korea. So in the 2 years that I was there, I was making good money and my employer was actually paying for my rent. So during those 2 years, every time I got paid, I sent $1,200 home, or a second year a little bit more because I had gotten a raise. Long story short, after 2 years, I had 30 grand. And I was like, okay, I know to be responsible, you should invest. That just kind of, I knew saving was good, but that was my next step. And so basically after that year, I came home and I had not lived in Canada, right? So I was just visiting Canada to see my family. And at the time I was dating a South African, so we got to travel out west. But basically coming back home for a visit, and I thought it was okay to invest. But there are a lot of technicalities that I would learn. So a common account that is very helpful for investing in Canada is called the tax-free savings account. And I decided that's how I wanted to invest. Now, keep in mind, I had to basically ask my dad to set up a meeting at the local bank. So I went in with the financial advisor and he asked me all of these questions. Do you have a job right now? Like, are you employed? No, I don't. I'm visiting. I just made, feeling on top of the world as a 24-year-old with all this money that he's never had before. I was like, no, I don't. I'm just visiting. I'm going to backpack for a year. So no. And then he goes, okay. And then this money that you want to invest, did you make it in Canada? No, I didn't. I made it in South Korea. I sent it over. So all these different things that, looking back though, so of course, what the financial advisor has to do is make a personal assessment on me and make sure that I'm eligible to, and this is called know your client. You've got to get all the information first, and then deem um, whether what they're looking for is something that you can provide in some sort of a mutual fund, what they have. Um, so that would be the process. But it turns out that I found out again the hard way. Or here, let me. I don't want to jump ahead, but so I invested $10,000 in mutual funds, and I opened up a tax-free savings account to do it. So that's obviously a benefit of being Canadian, is you open up the TFSA. Any money that you make in there grows tax-free, and any money that you withdraw from the TFSA is also tax-free, which is an amazing benefit. So I used that account. I invested in mutual funds, and I did it through a financial advisor, the sales rep. So I go traveling for a year, have the time of my life, and then I come back home May of 2017. And then I only found out in August of 2017 when I called CRA to find out what my tax-free savings account contribution limit is, because every Canadian, you have to be 18, you need to have a social insurance number, and you technically need to be living in Canada to open one. So that's what I didn't realize. So once I called CRA, they said, oh yeah, no, you have this much limit. You have plenty because you only opened a TFSA when you were 24. You were 18 when they were created, so I had plenty of room. But what I found out was that, you actually owe CRA $1,400 because you invested when you were a non-resident. And my first instinct was like, what? What do you mean? Like I owe $1,400? Yes, because again, you invested when you were non-resident. And it just instantly was like, okay, damn, like what went wrong here? So then obviously I didn't do my research. So it was all my fault. And that's something that I came around to realizing. But obviously I went to the financial advisor right away. I was like, dude, either you don't know the rules of the product you were selling me, or you clearly just don't seem to care about the legalities of the product. Anyways, it just made me realize that the financial advisor at the bank wasn't all that I thought he was, just being young and naive. So that was like the first biggest investment, because ultimately that was just a wake-up call, and that led me to starting to invest on my own. So I didn't make much money out of it, but it was a big lesson.
And one question I do want to ask before we get into the next investment was, you said financial advisor with an O. Yes. Can you kind of clarify why you said that and what that means?
Yes. So this is quite interesting. And there's a Money Sense magazine that you can reference online. But so it turns out in Canada, the term financial advisor with an O is technically an unregulated business term that you or I could use, technically. Financial advisor with an E, that advisor is used when someone is an actual fiduciary, which means that they've put in the work to become either a licensed portfolio manager, or they've put in the work to, just to rise up in the ranks in the financial world, which makes them a fiduciary, which is ultimately what you want. Anyone who has a fiduciary obligation, make that a lawyer, make that a financial, like a portfolio manager, they have to work in the best interest of their client, which would be you, ideally. But financial advisor with an O is a blanket term that the financial services industry has allowed to give to sales representatives. Here's the big issue though. In Canada, and again, I'm sourcing this references from that magazine article, but 96% of advisors in Canada are with an O, and they're just sales reps. And those advisors who are sales reps for institutions are not obligated to work in the best interest of their clients. They are obligated to recommend the best investment based on what the institution wants. So that's the crazy thing, because that means, on the other hand, only 4% of advisors in Canada are actual fiduciaries that you want to trust your money with. Now, this is just something most people don't know, but then the other iffy thing that it gets into is that if you are a financial advisor with an E, you're not taking on clients that have a net worth less than a couple $100,000, just because it's not worth it, right? Like that's a lot of work, and you need to be compensated fairly for all the work you're going to do. So that's why, maybe 4% of Canadians can actually get access to an advisor with an E, whereas 96% are left with the advisor with an O, and either learning the hard way, like I did, or just never knowing and then getting to retirement and being affected by those fees as well. That's a whole nother topic to get into, but that's the distinction, though. It's kind of wild.
Is it a similar thing in the States? I'm just curious. About 50% of my audience is in the States, according to my analytics. So is it a similar thing in the States where you can have an advisor with an O versus an advisor with an E?
I don't know if that's the thing in the States. It did mention that this was Canada only, but the best thing you can do is just check if someone is managing your money for you, ask them directly, are you a fiduciary? If they say no, that's not a great sign. and I would recommend at least considering a robo-advisor, because even, Wealthsimple in Canada, Wealthfront in the US, robo-advisors are actually fiduciaries. So in 2020, anyone wanting to invest should just skip the advisor, at least in Canada, and go for that robo-advisor. But yeah, as for the US, I don't necessarily know, or I don't exactly know, but the US is very different than Canada, because Canada has the highest management fees in the world, just because we're a wealthy nation and we have a very small population in terms of like volume for business. So just to give you context, the average fee in Canada that the average Canadian will face is like 2.5%. In the US, it won't go above 1%. Otherwise, you're not going to stay in business with all the other asset management companies, if that makes sense.
And that 2.5% over time adds up quite a bit. Eh? Like it might sound small, but it's actually pretty big, right?
Over 30 years, that's 60% of your nest egg. So if the returns aren't offsetting that by a lot every single year, you're just losing. Yeah, you're essentially losing money. It's a horrible structure. And I don't think until a lot of Canadians wake up to this or realize they have less money than they thought they would in a couple of years, we're not going to hear too much about it. But yeah,
that's wild. And so what are these other two investments that you've made? I believe the other one is with your time and resources, if I'm not mistaken. Are the other two correct?
Yeah. So it would be money, time, and energy. So yeah, no, thank you.
Energy.
No, that's good. I guess, so that would be the first one though, because yeah, ultimately that started everything that I've been able to do. So that was great. So let's go with energy first, because this is more of just like, it's not an investment I made my whole life, but within this past year, it's really helped. And that is quitting alcohol. Like I always had a love-hate relationship in the past. Growing up in a suburb in Canada, once you turn 14, there's really nothing to do besides start going out and trying to drink with your friends and do all these things. And so that was just, for me growing up, I thought that was normal, and I thought that you started that as a teenager and that was just part of your life. And it wasn't really until I'd come back from traveling and just realized that didn't have to be normal. So, and I guess like I'll just try to shorten this one because it just has to do with this one year. But I decided on January 8th that I'm just going to stop consuming alcohol because, I either was drinking too much because I'm a small guy compared to my friends and I can't keep up. There's that. I feel terrible the next day. And, it's just really not for me. And it's kind of the best decision I ever made because as of January 8th, 2020, I haven't touched alcohol. I haven't felt any need to. And it's just the amount of energy I feel like I've gotten back is just, what I've been able to accomplish this year just with my brands and podcast and just being able to keep it going. And then also just, so like on top of that, so yeah, maybe let's say this is just the ability to say no. We can change it to that. But, a lot of things, being able to say no because I just didn't think it was right for me anymore. And then trusting my gut and trying to do my own thing, that has really helped me a lot. Not even this year, over time, but, I guess the more you identify with what you really want to do, the more you say no so that you can stick to what your values are aligning with and what your principles are, it just makes things easier. And that's one thing I found, at least by learning to say no and, putting the foot down and be like, no, I'm going to try not doing that. And it's worked out for me.
Was there a catalyst to that January 8th date? Was like January 7th a very rough morning after a long night of partying or anything like that? Or was it just like you hadn't had alcohol at that point? You're like, I'm just going to keep this going and see how long I can keep this up.
So I was in Mexico and actually it was the end of my vacation and I'm just like, you know what? Like I don't, like, I love a good party and I don't mind it, but I just set a goal not to do it. Like there was a big catalyst, but I just don't want to bring that up on the episode. So
yeah.
But so yeah, it was basically more of just a goal for myself because I just started to see it differently. And it got to a point where I was like, I'm just going to try not to. I'm going to go back home and I just don't need it. And I mean, sure enough, this whole year has turned up, the amount of money you're saving not going to bars and whatnot. Like, I guess you could say I kind of trained for this year in the first few months, but not even. I just thought, I was like, you know what, let's just see what I can do without it. And I just felt fantastic. Even, after the first month, after the second month. So, and it was just one of those where it's like, what purpose is it serving me anymore? The only time I would go out is when I'd go hang out with these people that, halfway through the night, I'm like, why am I here? They're just not necessarily my group anymore or whatnot. So a lot of circumstances that added up. I just decided to try it, and I'm glad I did. So.
Mhm. Is this something you're going to continue into 2021, or were you like, this is my 2020 goal, and just kind of maybe casually in 2021 or anything like that? Or are you just going to continue being completely sober moving forward?
No, I think I'll casually have a beer or two, like one beer a night kind of thing here and there, but never again will I want to like. It's hard. It's a hard thing to say, but I also don't like using the words never or always. Like that's just not necessarily how I want to view things. So after January 8th, like even my boss from my company gave me some beers for Christmas that are going to stay there till the 8th. And then after that, I'll open one and enjoy it. But like just the aimless, mindless drinking that used to be done in high school, I'm like, no, you know what, Jordan, you're past that. You're done, and made a big difference. So.
Mhm. Oh, 100%. And then that other, your investment in your time. Where the investment using your time, what has that been?
That's got to be travel, I think. Just because if I had not traveled and been exposed to different ways of living, different cultures, different backgrounds, different experiences, I wouldn't have the ambitions. And I think just the general understanding of like nature and the world right now. Um, so like considering in total, I've been to 30 countries and I'd love to visit, all of them if I can in time. Living in South Korea for 2 years, Vietnam for 4 months, South Africa for 4 months. Um, it's just made me a more well-rounded person and added a ton of character. So that time spent traveling, it's always going to stick with me. So that's probably it.
I want to talk about, I don't know if you can consider it an inflection point or not in terms of your travel, but bring me back to a day on the bus where you ran into your friend Alex. Can you kind of tell me the significance of that event?
Yeah, for sure. So this was university, third year university, and this was the fall. So had I gone just down the normal path, I would have graduated and then probably gone on to go back to school, like teachers college, in that summer. So this was the fall, third year university, and I get on the bus and I see a friend of mine, and I remember thinking, I'm like, oh, I could just put my headphones on and sit down and not talk to him. But he's a buddy that I hadn't seen in a while. Grew up playing hockey with him, so I decided to go pursue him and say, "Hey, Alex, how's it going?" And the reason I thought to go see him is because I actually he was a friend that I saw last year in Cuba. So a group of my friends, a group of his friends, ended up at the same resort at the same time, and we had a ball. So my first thought was like, "Hey, Alex, how's it going? Do you plan to go back to Cuba again?" I think this was in October, November, and he goes, "Nah, man, I have bigger dreams." I was like, "What is that?" He's like, "Oh, my friend just got back from Thailand, and I think I want to go." And instantly, that just planted the idea. I was like, "Thailand? What do you want to?" Just had no idea, completely oblivious. And then when he started explaining it, and I got home, and he'd mentioned a bunch of names of cities and islands that just went right over my head because I'd never heard them before. So I was like, okay, whatever these places are. But for whatever reason, I was like, that's cool. That's really cool. And sure enough, I'm just glad that I saw him on the bus and approached him and started talking to him because by December we had planned our route, we'd booked our tickets, and then for May 14th or May 15th to June, it was about a month of Thailand and Bali, and we ended up going on the trip together. It was the best time ever, and it was right when I got home that I realized I'm going to sign up for that United TESOL certification to teach English as a second language. Did that in September, and then by the next February, I was on my flight to Korea. So I think if that had not happened, I wouldn't be where I am today. So.
Mhm. And you mentioned September. I have the exact date written down here. September 29th, 2013 was when you got that certificate. And
Yeah. Or no,
I'm,
yeah, that's right. It was.
and I'm curious. So you go through the certificate. You said it was November where you ended up leaving. So you got it in September and November is when you left.
No. So I got the certification September 29th. I think I had set the school up October, November, and then February 14th was when I was due to land in Incheon.
And then how do you feel when you land there? Like obviously like you traveled to Asia for a little while, but it's got to be a completely different feeling when I'm here to stay kind of indefinitely for lack of a better word. Like how are you feeling when you walk off the plane at that point?
Honestly, just like a kid in a candy store, and it hadn't even hit me yet. So I remember getting off and just like this is so cool. I'm here on my own. It really pulls you into the present. Nothing like travel pulls you into the present moment and gets you to think on your feet. So, getting there off the plane, and then I walk through and I end up seeing someone with my name holding a sign like Jordan Hiley and Young, we're here to pick you up. So like that was super cool. And then they're driving me into the city, which, had I not gone to where I would be, which is only a 30-minute ride from the airport, could have been in there for a couple hours and then be like, oh my God, where am I going? Start overthinking it. So it's just really cool that it brought me into my city and I could watch it through the window all the way. And then I remember getting to my apartment at about like 6 in the evening, and I met the director. And the one thing that was missing was toilet paper in the apartment. It's just like, you can't really leave. You don't want to go because someone's supposed to come back. I just, at that moment, I was just so excited. Your thoughts running. And then what was quite cool about that first evening was, I think by about maybe 9 or 10 p.m., like I literally just turned the lights off to go to bed. And then people started banging on my doors, and it was the other teachers that welcomed me. And they're like, "Hey, we're going out for karaoke. Do you want to come?" And I was like, "Yes, let's go." And so like within the first 24 hours, I'd already met a bunch of other foreigners that were doing what I was doing, but they've been doing it already. And I was like, "Oh, like this is the best decision I ever made." And just went from there.
And why South Korea? It was because of, actually, it was because they paid for the apartment and it was a pretty decent salary, right? Like that's why I ended up picking South
Compensation. Yeah.
Korea. Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been between Japan and South Korea, and there was recently an earthquake in Japan, so I was like, "I'll go to Korea." So, but yeah, strictly compensation. Yeah.
And so talk to me about the experience of teaching over in South Korea. I had a teacher when I believe it was 11, 12, and she taught in Thailand, like kind of before coming over and becoming my teacher. But I can remember her telling us different stories where like, she'd be like, "Take your seat." And the kids didn't understand like that expression. So they all literally would pick their seats up or anything. So I was just curious, like if you could tell me like kind of your experience teaching in South Korea, like what that was like.
It was a great wake up call and learning experience. Like the kids were fantastic. They spoke better English than you know even kids in Canada at the age of like 6 or 7, at least grammarly and structurally, which is kind of wild. Their vocab might be a lot less, but their sentences are more structured. But it was really interesting because I also like the context. I was fortunate enough to go into an area that was quite wealthy and well off. So all the students had essentially been in the school that I was teaching at through the entire kindergarten program. And then I was starting to teach them in grade 1, 2, 3. So their English was great. They were cute as can be. It was a lot of fun. It was just more of, uh, having to learn the cultural norms. So one example is, I think after 2 weeks, there was just miscommunication. And I had a foreign teacher for every class, so like a Korean teacher. And then I was the foreign teacher. We had the co-teacher, sorry. And I remember we'd found out that after 2 weeks, we were both teaching lesson A, and I was supposed to be teaching lesson B. But it was a miscommunication. And then I didn't think too much of it. But then I got pulled into the office, and the director said that every night you need to type up your lesson plans and then give them to me the day before. This is not a joke. Otherwise, you might be sent home. And it's just like, oh, okay. So that was just one of those where like I got there and treated it more as a fun thing. After that wake up call, I was like, okay, I really need to not take this so lightly and really focus. But I think that ultimately made me a better teacher. I think fundamentally too, though, teaching English to kids is the best way to relearn English, because I learned way more teaching basic grammar. What would the different type, like grammar, sentence structure, present, past tense, like just different ways of using it. It all started to click and make sense again as I was teaching it and explaining it to the kids, versus when I was in high school sitting there and trying to take it all in for the first time. So that was great. Um, the kids were so fun. They were like, it's just really what I would have wanted teaching to be if I were to teach in Canada, just like smaller classes. Also keep in mind, this is a private school, so it's not like, these are parents, again, wealthy parents that can pay for their kids to go to school after they're done in their elementary school. So it's not classes of 30 kids or anything like that. It's like a group of 8 to 12 kids max. So that way it's way more interactive. But the other sad difficulty was that in South Korea, at least, likely in Japan and China, they're very strict. So these kids are going to elementary school from, let's say, 8 to, so the kindergartners are coming in from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., but then anyone that's in grade 1 to grade 6, technically for the school, they're going to their elementary school from 9 a.m. to 1. Then they get some sort of a break. Then they might come to my English Hagwon. Then they'll go to Korean history. Then they'll go to math. Then they'll go to space, or like another form of schooling. And then they get to go home at 8 p.m. to their, like, it's not a healthy way that it's organized there. That gave me a lot of perspective too. And just that like education systems, can work for some individuals, but I don't know. I'm a bit of a visionary too, right? So when I got there, I'm like, how can we make this better and make this actually enjoyable for kids? So I hope that answers it, because it's just, it was amazing and I loved it. But, again, over time, you just kind of, you're teaching a curriculum that's built for you, but then even then the curriculum could be better. And but it was a good first teaching experience. I just want to say that I'm very glad that I went and got paid to learn to teach, as opposed to paying and studying for 2 more years on how to teach, because you only teach by doing, right? And that's one thing that I just at least feel like I can just carry that with me now. So.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that you found that you learned, like you kind of relearned English yourself as you were teaching, because you often hear people say that you learn best when you can teach it to others. That's when you're actually going to get it. And which is interesting. And so I'm curious too, because your original intent when you went to school, I know you went for social sciences, your intent was to become a teacher. And so how, I know you said you would have been paying as opposed to getting paid, but like how else do you think it would have, your experience would have differentiated if you had stayed in Canada and tried to learn teaching that way?
I mean, I'd probably just be very angry and pissed off right now dealing with what's happened. And I had a bit of foresight because my sister-in-law is actually a teacher with the Ottawa Carleton Catholic School Board. Sorry, Ottawa Carleton Catholic School Board. And so I was following in her footsteps a bit because that was kind of just the one path I saw that would work for myself. But then I also did see how like she had waited, I think, 4 or 5 years to get a legitimate position or like a full-time one. But then you keep hearing about, oh, like, a lot of people want to become teachers. Everyone's doing this. And then you realize that there's going to be a big lineup. And, if you don't have that connection, which is good to have in order to try and speed you up there, it just seemed like too many people were trying to get into a space. And I was like, that's saturated. I'm not going to do that. And I'm really glad I did. But that was just the thought process. I made a quick decision.
And I'm sure with teaching too, like the turnover isn't fast. You know what I mean? Like teachers, if they get a good spot, they'll hold it throughout their
Oh, yeah.
career, or at least
They
they
won't want
have.
to retire once they're comfortable, right? And like that's one thing too. I also come to realize now that you really limit yourself as a teacher though, because there's still just too much red tape. And I'm just very glad I went with the decision that I made.
And so you said how part of the reason you picked South Korea was compensation wise. And so you're making decent amount and you were sending, I believe you were sending $1,000 a month home, right? Something like that every single month.
1,200 the first year, 1,400 the second year.
Okay. And so where did you have that foresight to save that money? Because like most kids, you put them like recent graduate, like here's a ton of money. You have no expenses, go nuts. And you're like, actually, I'm going to split this in half and like start saving some of it. Like where did that foresight come from?
I think that's a good question, man. And thanks for asking. Because honestly, it took me even until like the last few years to realize that what I was doing there was a skill that other people don't have, or like a habit that you either start and others don't. I don't know. Maybe I've understood money growing up like a little bit better than I realized I did. Um, but fundamentally, I just thought, well, I think the main reason I really wanted to go to South Korea to teach was because I knew that I could make enough money to travel after. I mean, obviously, I wanted to go teach, but then I also had that idea of travel in the background. So it's not to say that I ignored that completely. And I just knew that if I do this, as long as I send 1,200 every month, I'm gonna have a lot of money in a year. Like that was just my thought process. And it's funny because 6 months in, I actually met my ex-girlfriend that I did a lot of traveling and whatnot there. And over time in the relationship, I was the one that had saved up a ton, and she was the one who spent a lot of money and didn't save well. Um, and when I wasn't just spending wastelessly on the weekend like other people, um, she would, or people would mention, "Oh, you're just cheap. Oh, you're saving all this money." Yeah, sure. Like in hindsight, I'm like, no, yeah, I have a habit that guaranteed that at least for the next year I wouldn't have to work and I could experience a way of life that I'd never experienced before. But I don't know where to tell you. Just to me, it made sense, and therefore I did it. So, uh, uh, like on the other side of that, so I was sending 1,200 home, but then I had 1,000 left, and the only utilities, or the only expense I had was utilities. So every month I had to spend $100 on heating and whatnot. But then I had 900 for the rest of the month. I thought if I cannot survive on $900, there's a problem with me. So, I saved more spending for the weekends. This, like during the weekday from Monday to Friday, this is where I learned how to cook. I only did trivia nights on Thursday with friends. So, like, that was my one night of spending a little bit more. And it just, I saved my money for the weekends. And oftentimes I wouldn't spend all that I needed to. The other thing for context is like taxis were much cheaper in Korea. Alcohol, you could buy it at the corner store and you could get like straight alcohol called soju. It's the most sold alcohol in the world for $1. You could get a type of rice wine for $2. You could get a liter of beer for $1.50 or $2. So, when you think about it, you're going out to a restaurant and then you're drinking and then you might go to a club. you didn't have to pay cover in Korea. So you could only spend $10 out at a night to get all the way into Seoul. Or no, not to say $10, sorry, but like you could spend $30 in a night, 20 on your meal, 10 just getting around, and then, wait for the subway in the morning to go home at 6 a.m. kind of like it was different. And so that way I optimized for cost efficiency. Just another thing I wanted to add that really did change the trajectory of the trip was that there were also these hiking groups. So since Korea is a very small country, you can drive from the north, the border of Seoul, or like from Seoul to the south, in called Seoul Hiking Group, where you would sign up, pay like $50 to $80 for an entire weekend, and then you would meet in Seoul Friday night. Then you would take the bus to the bottom of a mountain, get off at about 4 a.m. with all these other foreigners, start hiking to the peak of the mountain for sunrise at 7 a.m. And, so we'd bring a little flashlight and whatnot. And this was just something I never got exposed to in Canada. I met so many people. I eventually started going on these trips. But, when you realize that you can pay for this trip $80, your whole weekend's pretty much paid for. And then you bring 20 or 30 on top of that to spend on extra stuff. It was easy. So that's why I took advantage. And after the 2 years, when you include added flights, bonuses for each year, and then like the 1,200 and 1,400, I had 30 grand. And I was like, wow, this worked. And then that's where the next year was invest the 10K to be responsible. And then I spent the 20K to just go travel. And I think I was away for about 15 months. So.
And actually, I do want to talk about that travel. But before that, I'm curious. You mentioned how Thursdays was the trivia night that you'd go out with your coworkers. Was there a lot of nights though where they would go out and you would stay back because you're saving money?
Yes. They, like, not to say a lot of nights, but just every single night they might go to the same restaurant 5 nights in a row, just because, like every other person in that position, they have more money that they could ever deal with, and they need to go out and be social, and they need to do what other people are doing. And I guess maybe that's when I realized I had a bit of a knack where I don't mind spending time by myself. I don't mind being an introvert. Because when I'd first gotten there, I started a blog. I had a few ideas, so that it also didn't make sense to me that going out it's just not realistic. I guess maybe that's the sense. But people were doing that. And I would go, I think in the first couple months, especially, I would go with them once a week. But I think it's also, like, looking back, really, it was after the first few months that I established that saving routine. But yeah, definitely I got to a point where I was like, I could go out every night and eat dinner with them, or I just don't. And, doesn't change anything really. So
I've kind of a two-pronged question based on that. And the first one is, how do you handle the peer pressure in that situation? Because if you're the guy that's always not going to dinner, there's got to be some element of, well, like you mentioned, actually, like, oh, you're just being cheap, whatever, da, 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 da. How do you handle that peer pressure? And two, how are you comfortable being home and just spending time with yourself? Because for a lot of people, that's a difficult thing to do. So how have you kind of cultivated that ability?
I know. So I'll answer the first part first, just because, like, I don't know, saying no, I guess when you know why you're saying no, it makes it easier. That's one thing I can say. And on top of that, it was just like, I don't know, at some point, it's just like, what's like another night of going to eat the same thing and whatnot? It's tough to say because, I wasn't always like that. I remember in high school, I was very much someone that would give into the wants and desires of everyone else just to try and fit in and make them happy. And I guess maybe when I first had gotten there and established saying no and not doing that, it's just because, I don't know, like you say, everything else was new to me. Like there would be one evening where I'd go and do my grocery shopping. Then the next evening, like, I almost just save these times for myself. I think maybe the easiest way is just to say, like, it's easier to say no if you have intent or reason behind it. So, like, as much as everyone gets FOMO and you're going to think, oh, I want to go out with this group of people. It's, I don't know. It's a very tough question to answer. And, I just did like, like, I don't know. Do you have any nut or questions you can ask from that to try and find something finer in there?
I don't know if it's a question, but I think the key there with your answer is that you knew why you were saying no.
Exactly.
If you have a greater purpose or something that you're working towards, even if it's just groceries, but like if you have something you're working on, like for me, I just personally, anecdotally, like I can say no to things because I know I'm working on this podcast or whatever I'm working on because there's something I'm actually going to do. It's not like all my friends are going to go and have a good time and I'm just going to like sit on my couch and try and find something to watch on TV. But so it's like, I am, in that case, I would feel like I'm missing something because I said no to do nothing. But when you're saying no to do something is when it becomes easier.
I love that. There you go. You kind of highlighted it. And maybe that's because, and also, I guess I should put this into context that I think all the time. I'm just one of those people that are constantly analyzing cost benefit analysis and stuff in my head. And that's something I didn't always have. It seems to come in waves in my life. And at least, these past few years, it's certainly come back. I guess then that's when I had it. And I just realized that, like, it was almost like it was something that I was planning for a long time. And again, like the main reason I was going was to eventually save enough money to travel, right? So by the end of the year, and that is a good point because, like, when I think back again, I think it was Monday and Wednesday night we would play basketball every evening, like me and some other of the guys. So in a way, we were having fun and getting in shape, but we just weren't spending money going to the restaurant with the girls and whatnot, kind of thing, like. So we found exactly. I would have found other things to do, or just I tend to not get into doing the same. Well, not to say because I have routines that I repeat every single day, and I think they're great. But just going out to that dinner in that area, it's just like you can gossip as much as you want, but it's not going to essentially get you at the end of the day. And then let me answer that second question about how I got comfortable with yourself a little bit with context on what I've done this year, because coming home, learning how to invest and whatnot, that was a big wake up call for me. But one thing I really needed to do, or was a goal of mine as of last year, and I think one of the reasons I quit drinking was because I just, despite where I was, I still wasn't essentially happy being alone. So, like as difficult it is to say no to people and not give in to what they want to do, it really was just a lot of self-reflecting and thinking out what was important to me and like what I thought, like forward looking and thinking, if I want to be an investor or if I want to be a podcaster, I need to start acting the way an investor acts, or I need to act the way a podcaster acts, and literally start these habits. And one of my goals was also just to become more creative. So for context, like it wasn't the start of this year, but for about 2 years, I've been waking up extra early just to read for an hour in the morning. So like this morning, I'm up at 5 a.m. and first thing I do, I jump to the PDF I have on my computer, or if it's a book, and I read for 1 hour. And that's a habit that I absolutely love because last year I set a goal to read 52 books and I only got to 32, but that was more than I've ever read in a year. And guess how many books I've read this year so far?
75.
I wish. No, 55 though. So like
Okay,
I've literally read a
yeah.
book a week. And that's just because I set that hour every morning. It's the first thing I do. So therefore in the evening when I'm tired and most people will be like, "Oh, I don't want to go to bed yet, but I don't know what to do." I'm like, "Oh, bedtime. Yes." Because then I get to wake up. And again, I'm mindfulness is a big thing. It's not something everyone practices, or at least feels like they're getting progress when they're practicing it. But I started meditating as well. And then I added that after the reading. So I'd wake up for an hour, read from 5 to 6. From 6 to 6:15, I do a bit of an ab workout. So I have just like a 3-round circuit that I established for myself. And from the start of this year, like I now have an 8-pack and I've never been shredded like I am now. Running once a day, at least like just getting out and running once a day, that was a big thing. Let me just not get ahead of the morning routine. So from 6 to 6:15, I do that ab workout. From 6:15 to 6:45, 30 minutes, I write. I just sit down and I write for 30 minutes. Some days things come to me, some days they don't. But as long as I sit there and I just try for 30 minutes, that's something that I have just at least found the compounding effect every single day is tremendously important. And then from 6:45 to 7, I meditate. And that's where I just do like the breathing exercise. And it's, again, everyone thinks, oh, meditation is not for me, or I haven't found a way to enjoy it. There's no way to enjoy it. It's just stopping thinking and realizing that you're thinking, like your thoughts are flowing, but you aren't your thoughts. Like that's really the whole purpose. So my process is just breathe in for 7 seconds, hold for 7 seconds, release for 7 seconds. And I just do that for 15 minutes and that's worked for me. And then from 7 to 8 before I even start work. And again, factors have helped. Unfortunately, the coronavirus has made me work from home. So that's, I'm very lucky that I've been able to try all these things this year and stick to them, and they've worked out very well for me. So I just imagine, back when I went to Korea, I was doing something similar to that, where at least in the evenings where I wasn't going to do what other people did, I had something in mind. I'd started a blog, or I was, going out with different people. I don't know. I think just really having the intent behind it, makes it a lot easier to say no, and makes it a lot easier to enjoy being with yourself. Not being too hard on yourself too. I mean, I know you're a big Gary Vee fan. Try not to judge yourself. Try not to set expectations that are too high. Like just one day at a time, So hopefully that answers all that.
Is that writing in the morning? Is that like a journal or is that like a creative writing thing? Because you mentioned you wanted to become more creative.
It's just creative. Yeah. I mean, I call it COVID Chronicles. Call it a journal, call it creative. It's just like at the start of the year, I was writing jokes. Midway through the year, I was writing raps that I was actually performing on TikTok, my 10 inspirational raps. Like that was a lot of fun, but it's more of just been like, what do I feel about writing? Because I don't know about, I mean, I know how you are, and I'm sure you've studied a lot of the people that you admire and that you want to look up to. And that's one thing I did this year, and reading or following like Jerry Seinfeld, Gary Vee, or a lot of these people, especially creative people and comedians, writers. Um, that's something long term that I would love to get into. I love to make people laugh, and I love to write. So it's just something that, again, I have to think ahead. I'd love that to be my job in 10 years. So how do I make that my job in 10 years? Write for 30 minutes, like make this time every single day and I will get there. But what those people mention is that they don't believe anyone is more talented than anyone else. What they really like, what they attest to, and a lot of what they've done is like, you just have to make time to write every day if you're going to be a writer. And like when you break it, it doesn't get more simple than that, right? Like if you want to be a photographer, you should be spending at least 30 minutes a day taking pictures and then maybe editing your photos. You want to be a podcaster, you've got to have at least one call a week with someone that you don't know and get comfortable asking questions. You want like, so it was maybe just a flip in the switch of my mind when I realized that like, well, if I want to write, I need to be writing every day. Doesn't matter what it is. And, as long as you just show up to that habit, the ideas sort of come to you in a weird way, but
Mhm. That
yeah.
that idea or that element of creativity is really resonating with me right now because I feel like that's just similar thoughts that I'm having. Like I just listened to Jerry Seinfeld interview and I was like
With Tim
really
Ferriss?
yeah,
Or
of course.
that was a good one, man. That was a really good episode.
And now it's like now I'm like I'm gonna buy Crave so I can watch Seinfeld. And I wanna start taking time to watch shows like Seinfeld or go through some of the greatest movies of all time to just appreciate the art that goes into them. And I've started listening to comedy again. I'm not listening to it just to laugh, but it's like I'm also watching it or listening to it to see how they structure their jokes and like how they'll make a joke in the beginning and they'll thread that joke through at the end to kind of reference a joke they made earlier in the show. And like I'm just really resonating with the creative side and like the art side of things
Right. It's
recently.
like well, you control the crowd, right? As a comedian and whatnot. No, I think that's a good way to look at it because think of how much content you've consumed over your life. And if you just used a different lens to look at that content, you can learn from it like anything else.
100%. But I'm curious, though, with that in mind, you said that you want to become more creative. But on the flip side, you're always thinking, you're looking at like the cost benefit and you're like kind of analyzing things. So, like, would you just say you have almost like an analytical type brain to an extent?
I don't know, man. I'd like to say maybe I've developed a way to access both parts of my brains, weirdly, because I was also never really this analytical person. This kind of more came out once I got comfortable with numbers, once I started investing. But let me like again, I should provide more context because like this whole year, like how do I describe this? My goal in the fall, like I started my podcast in 2019, the fall, and I was like, okay, winter's coming. We live in Canada. I'm just going to hibernate all winter and try to get better at these things I want to get better at. And sure enough, like March was more or less, tragic and an unfortunate situation, just more reason for me to stay home and keep doing what I'm doing. But I just doubled down on all that already that I was essentially doing. And like, not necessarily just for the creativity. Like just to give you an example though, I've studied a lot of like using YouTube as an educational source. I've gone back and this is through books, through YouTube's, but I've tried to reteach myself the basics of physics, chemistry, mathematics, all these important sciences that really govern the laws of nature in the world. And I'm going back and learning the fundamental basics, just like the underlying principles. And that's where, compound interest is such an easy thing to overlook and not understand it. And like that quote you mentioned at the beginning, just listen. Compound interest, this is by Albert Einstein. Compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. Those who understand it earn it. Those who don't pay it. And then when you look at the world, 99% of people are really wealthy and understand compound interest because they've invested their money to grow positively. 99% of the people, unfortunately, although they think they might, they don't understand it if they are compounding in debt in the wrong direction. So it's just like, it is simple, but something that's simple doesn't necessarily mean it's easy, right? So Just learning the fundamentals and kind of the basics of these different. And again, not to say that I'm any sort of a scientist, but just I want to recommend, like, there's a guy named Shane Parrish who's actually from Ottawa, and he's got these 2 books called The Great Mental Models. And so from reading, like, from studying Charlie Munger, who's Warren Buffett's right hand partner, businessman, Charlie talks about, he's like, the one thing that's wrong with academia is that everyone specializes and looks through their own narrow lens, and they can't agree with anything else because they're so focused on what their own thing is. And it's like, how it's tough to progress when you're so focused on one thing and you can't connect two ideas from different subjects together, right? Because a lot of these subjects do correlate. So I think that's one thing that's at least helped develop my understanding of, like, numbers and investing, and then the world, relationships, communication, podcasting. Um, just there's been a lot that I've been studying, and just to put that, like, studying the people that I look up to the most, that I'm, that I want to, like Joe Rogan. I've been listening to so much of his podcast, trying to find his most interesting guests, and, like you say, watching to go through that. Like George Carlin, famous old comedian, that's fantastic. Albert Einstein, for example, Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winning physicists who really helped people understand electrothermodynamics, which is kind of like the fundamentals of energy right now. Like, all these different things are just, like, it's all for free online. And, just because you had a bad teacher, a bad math teacher or a bad science teacher in high school, you've never learned from these top-notch professors. That is free on the internet, right? So just, like, if you want, it was just a matter of, like, this year being like, look, Jordan, you're going to improve yourself drastically. All you got to do is just keep doing what you're doing every day. And that's at least really just helped, I think, bring my creativity back out, or at least, because I think, like many people, a couple of years ago, when I just felt in a rut, I was not creative because there's just a lot of stuff in my life that I had not figured out or aligned with what I actually believe.
I think, remind me after this podcast, I'm going to send you the links to a couple books. One's called The Almanac of Naval Ravikant. And
I just listened to fucking Naval, man. He's amazing.
This book, so someone went through and they listened to all of his podcasts, read his things, all these interviews he's done, and they compiled it into one book and essentially distilled everything Naval talks about, but organizes it into a book. And it's like, I think the PDF is free. So it's like, but it's a full book. I recently read it. So good. Another one is
The
called,
Navalmanac, isn't it called that?
yes, correct. Yeah. Another one is called 100 Mental Models. And I think it's positioned as a course, but it was like $30. And it comes, do you know this?
I've heard of it, but it's essentially similar to what I've been learning. But yeah, it's similar to um, a lot of what I read in those books, the Great Mental Models. Like,
yeah. So
it's
anyway,
basic, like, first principles. It's just going back to what do we know is true, and then from there, because just there's too much fluff nowadays.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing too, you talk about, like, you're watching Joe Rogan to see how he does the interviews. I'm watching, what's it called? My Next Guest Needs No Introduction with Dave Letterman. I'm just watching how he conducts interviews. But
I've heard of Dick Cavett. Have you ever come across Dick Cavett?
That name sounds familiar, but I don't know. Like, I can't, like, there's just like a name I vaguely kind of have somewhere in my brain, but
he's an interviewer I found over the summer, and he was an interviewer on live cable television in, like, the 70s to, like, maybe the 60s to the 90s. But he brought on, like, John Lennon, a few very big names, and he would have the most interesting conversations on TV. And you can go find a bunch of them on YouTube, and you just watch it and you'd be like, no wonder the majority of people, can't make a decision for themselves, because we've dumbed TV down so much. Like, where are these intelligent conversations happening on TV? They're just not there anymore. He's just another interviewer that, old timer, still alive today, but you could learn a lot from him too. He's really good.
yeah, I'm definitely going to check him out. That sounds really interesting. But where I was actually trying to ask a different question that we just kind of got you on a side tangent. But with you kind of having, again, you said you kind of can access both sides of your brain at this point, but how do you measure, I want to be more creative? Because when I, like, hear, like, you talk about, like, you like to analyze, like, the cost benefit of different things, and your mind's always going, how do you know when you become more creative? Is it just a feeling? Because I feel like that's a very difficult thing to measure.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's a good question, because qualitatively, I don't know how you measure that. It's very difficult. But all I can say is that when you at least try to start a habit and make it daily, um, and like, I do want to bring this back to at least just, like, the habit of me saving money so that I could travel. It's like, fundamentally, it's a habit. And, if you have any habits that you have that you don't like, you can try to replace them with just better habits. And that's where, anyone who isn't saving money, well, it's just because you have a spending problem. And unfortunately, the biggest problem is a lot of people like to lie to themselves, and it's very easy to lie to yourself. And I do think that also comes with, or the creativity might come to a point where you're not lying to yourself anymore and you're being honest with who you really are. And I think, again, I can only speak from my experience, but I think that's a big part. But like, so for anyone who can't save and wants to save, all you got to do is set up a pre-authorized transfer from your checking account into a TFSA or another account. Like, it's just that easy. And you set up that habit, you never have to think about doing it. But so like for making, how do I measure art? I just try to, when I go to bed, I actually have a little book beside my bed. So every time I go to sleep, I write down 3 things I did that day. And it's not long form or anything. It could just be like YouTube video, podcast call, whatnot. And then I also got this from a Tim Ferriss podcast with, I forget who the guy's name was. He's a polymath. But so I just started doing this recently. This is one thing I've helped. So he writes, he gives himself 2 marks at the end of the day for creativity and for feeling. So how you feel that day. And, a good day is a 2, an okay day is a 1, and a no day is just a 0. And his goal, and this is how he would measure it. So I think his name's Jim Rogers. I'll send you this information after, so just so we can confirm. But so at least every single night, when you're going to bed, you can just be like, was that a good creative day, whatnot? And you can just try to be honest with yourself. If you don't feel great going to bed, then put a 1. If you feel good, put a 2. But then he said after the end of the year, you can count. And, if you're over 1,000, like that's a very good creative year. It's just little ways that you can develop yourself to do it. But, I'm honestly not even really looking at what I've done so far this year. I'm almost still in it and really thinking that my whole idea was, as long as I just keep doing this every single year, and I've got nothing else to do because there's a global pandemic, I don't want to go see people I don't know. Because, hey, the whole mask dilemma, people not wearing it, has taught us we're not afraid of COVID. We're afraid of people that don't understand how science works and how breathing works, So, like, sorry, where was I going with that? I lost my train of thought.
You were talking about how you kind of measure becoming more creative. And you're talking about Jim Rogers or whatever his name is, how the 1s and 2s, and he'll kind of grade himself based off of his day on how creative he was or something like that.
Right. So, yeah, and just to bring it back is like, I honestly haven't really assessed what I've done this whole year, and I'm almost planning to do that in 2 days when I get to stop like my full-time job, right? But I just think, man, the whole idea is like, just try to, if you want to get more creative, just try to at least do it every day, and then only judge how you've done that day. Because if you're not putting the work in every single day, I don't think you're going to see results as quickly as you'd like to. And it's not easy to do that every day. People have a life and people are busy and it takes time. But, if you're doing one creative thing once a week, it's going to take you much longer to see any sort of results than if you're doing it every day and then making your goal simply just to be better than the day before.
Oh, I like that. I was just curious. It's kind of what I don't know if you ever use Notion, but I have a whole habit tracker in Notion now. So I can every day I just go through it and I go, did I go to the gym? Check yes or no. It's just the 1s and 0s. It's not
Here,
the
let
one.
me show you. This is what's made it really easy for me. Like, I literally beside my desk have this classic pen paper pad.
Okay.
And so it goes through my morning routine: read, write, meditation, MB, which is my job, and then exercise. And then I have TikTok, Instagram, and all the stuff. Obviously you can't see it clearly, but I don't use Notion, but it's because right beside me, I do the old fashioned way. I have pen and paper, and this is actually the second one I've gone through this year, dude.
Wow.
So I'm going to look back in 5-10 years and hopefully, have made enough money that I can just do cool stuff and inspire people to be their best selves and, put out content and whatnot. I can look back and I'd be like, yo, daily practice worked for me. And I think that's been the most effective.
With daily, I feel like this is actually probably a really relevant conversation right now with this episode dropping January 4th. So right after the new year, everyone's making New Year's resolutions.
Right.
And I think where people falter with their New Year's resolutions, and I'm curious because I want to know how you'd handle this with your daily practice, is when it comes to New Year's resolutions, people are like, I'm going to go to the gym every day. January 6th, they miss the gym and then they're off track and they're done, right? Because they're not going every day anymore. They've messed their resolution up. How do you handle when you miss a day? If you miss a day?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And honestly, this whole morning routine, I've not missed much, but you've probably heard this if you listen to any of the big podcasters, because it's something I've realized. our society has conditioned everyone to obsess about the outcome, the end result, right? They're obsessing about having shed 40 pounds. But then if you miss the third day, you're mad that you're not down 40 pounds as opposed to having just gone to do the workout a third day in a row, right? It's like people upset. And it's no one's fault. It's just really how we've, put the end result on the pedestal, but it's the process, man. It's like, I love waking up every morning so that I can read, because after I'm done reading, I get to work out. And then after I work, like, I've made it so that I love the process. And I don't know what the outcome is yet. I'm not focused on it. I know that eventually I just want to be my own boss and make a ton of money and do cool stuff and give back like that, right? But short answer, I think it's just I've deprogrammed myself not to worry too much about results, or because ultimately what people are looking for is just justification from other people. And like those are the shittiest results you could ask for. Like likes, what does that really mean? You know? Um Ultimately, I heard this from somewhere too, but it was like if you could replace the like button with the respect button, how much cooler would that be? But I think that's it for me, man. And again, it's not like this didn't come easy. Um, but it's only because I've really been adamant about, you know, making like sticking to my morning routine for so long that I've completely just I don't care about the long term outcome because I don't know what it is. I don't, you know, instead of focusing on something that is imaginary, just I've learned to love doing the process. I think that's probably does that make sense to you?
Yeah. But now based on that, curious, because so you love the process. You love waking up in the morning to read, but did you always love the process? And if you didn't, how did you get there? Because for a lot of people, it's like don't want to work out because they don't love working out. So it's like, how do you love the process when you're doing things like whether it be going to the gym or even a lot of people don't like reading? Like, how do you teach yourself to love that process?
Good question. So I don't think in whether I like or I don't like anymore. Fact or not fact? Is it going to happen or is it not? Like I people will think, "Oh, but I don't like that." It doesn't matter. What do you want? What results are you looking for? If you want those results, it doesn't matter if you like it or not. You show up and do it. And I know it's a lot easier said than done because people are in relationships, people have families and whatnot. But if you're in that position, but you still haven't been able to figure out any sort of process you like, or like, again, finding a way to um, mold it so that you like doing it, it's, that it's tough because at the same time, a lot of what, so like, I like the reading. I don't like the workout, but I do it every day because it's only 12 minutes. And like, I say it's 15, but it's 12 once I start. And I just know that once I'm done it, I'm done it. I don't like that part. Um, you just have to pick and choose. But again, like what I'm doing for myself, I'm lucky that I found this. And I mean, to be quite frank, is like, I love my mornings until 8 a.m. because then I have to start working for someone else. And unfortunately, I do keep a job because I'm fortunate to have one, and I'm grateful for that. But that's where my day sort of gets less great because I have to put in the work for the man for 8 hours. But then when I'm done that work, I've already done my creative stuff in the morning, first thing, right? It's done. Therefore, I can finish that day and just be like, well, I've done everything I need to, and then anything I add on top of that is just gravy. It's just um, it's good. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately probably being honest with yourself and really trying to evaluate what's important to you, because once you find out what's important to you, making the time is easy to do whether you like it or not, because you just know that over time you're taking steps to get to that outcome that you ultimately want. So it's like trying to design the process, or at least understand it enough so that the process makes it worthwhile, knowing that you'll get to that outcome, if that works.
Yeah. I'm assuming the answers to this question is yes, but
But hold on, let me just ask you, because like, is that easy for you to just I like, right? Like, is that easy for you to think differently? Is like whether you like it or you don't like it, and just try to think of like, is this or is it not? You know what I mean?
I think I don't know how to I don't know yes or no to that question. I
Because I
think
guarantee most people don't. Most people will think, well, I
yeah.
like this and I don't like this, so I'm not going to do it, and that's okay. But I think if you want success, you got to get past that.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day it just comes down to discipline. Right. And I want to say I am disciplined, and I think I am to an extent. I also might be harder on myself than I deserve credit for, because that could be part of this answer. But I think I'm aware of needing to be more disciplined, and I'm aware of doing things that I like, even though it might not be best for me. and it's something I have the self-awareness, and I know that it's something I need to work on. So it's like I'm not completely there, but I know I want to get there. If that
Yeah,
makes
and
sense.
that's a huge factor. Like self-awareness, I'm too self-aware almost. And it's not something that I necessarily chose to be, but as I'm 28 talking to you on December 22nd, I happen to be a very self-aware version of myself, right? So I think that's something that's helped. And again, I think this is a skill that I've developed over time. But I wasn't always like this. So again, it just goes to show that like results aren't going to come overnight. And um, yeah, I mean, self awareness is a big aspect, but then also just like not making excuses and taking action is going to produce the most results.
Mhm. How do you, with patience and needing, with you saying how in 10 years is when this might pay off, maybe it's longer, maybe it's shorter, so obviously there's going to be an element of patience there. How do you handle the bad days where you're like, man, maybe you don't even have these days, but how do you handle them where you're like, what am I doing, why am I still doing this, I'm about to post another video, maybe 100 people will see it, like I just spent hours and hours of my time prepping and doing this. Like how do you overcome the negative self-talk that comes when you experience those bad days?
So it's a lot of practice, but honestly, cannabis.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, cannabis has this amazing ability to sort of pull you out of your negative biases. And this was actually, I interviewed the author of The Little Book of Cannabis. She's a Canadian author out in BC. But she spoke to doctors, and each book kind of highlights a chapter of 10 ways cannabis can improve your life. And, this, it just kind of ties into how I've grown up my whole life. Cannabis was this terrible thing that can ruin your brain. And now we're finding out, and I've studied the history, is that no, actually, cannabis has been used for millennia, and only for the last 80 years has it been deemed bad. So there's a lot more to learn, which makes me super excited. But cannabis in moderation has this amazing ability for me in my brain to, when I'm thinking nonstop, and especially like you can call, like I've watched a lot of TED Talks, but like the default mode network. It's kind of just like we wake up, we get into our normal routines, and we're constantly thinking. And when you're in that frame of mind, it's very difficult, especially um, to think of anything else, right? When it's like I should be doing this, I should be, and you've got demands from family members or friends or your work. So at the end of the day, if I've had a bad day, like that's just running constantly, and like as much as I can try to take deep breaths throughout the day, and that's one thing I will do. But I also just happen to not sleep very well easily, just when I'm sober, and that's also just because my brain likes to seem to run, especially when I want to go to bed. Um, and so, not advocating that this is going to work for everyone, but as the best overall natural medicine in the world, it clearly has some benefits if you can use it in moderation and control yourself, because again, it's ultimately just a substance, um, and the user needs to use any substance with caution. But like, yeah, I think again, it's practice though of over the last 2 years, listening to tons of Gary Vee and these people that are like, look, your parents only knew what they knew, so them telling you to go one way is really just all that they knew worked for them at the time. And then so taking that into consideration is just constantly trying, stop being mean to yourself, stop judging yourself, stop doing all this. So it's a bit of that. And then during the day when that's happening, and I can't just access cannabis or anything like that, it's just one of those things where, okay, I'll try to take deep breaths. Because when you're breathing and you're trying to feel your body, it's very difficult to hear the thoughts that are coming through, and that's one thing that's helped. But it's fascinating because it does work for me, where at the end of the day, let's say it's 6 or 7 and I've accomplished what I've done, and even if it's been a tough day and I've been talking to myself, and even if I didn't accomplish much, it's crazy, but even just a little puff of a one hitter with cannabis, instantly it's like, ah, why are you being so mean to yourself, Jordan? It almost like it takes the blinders off and lets you be honest with yourself. And I really do believe that a lot of people don't like cannabis because it it forces them to be honest with themselves. It forces them to face some things that they might not be comfortable facing. And a lot of people would rather just not face that and live their whole life that way. And that does happen. And so yeah, again, I'm not saying that anyone should try this, but it has therapeutic benefits. There's a lot we don't know about it, and that's one thing that ultimately, at the end of the day, it puts me to sleep like a light and lets me get 8 hours every night. Um, but believe it or not, it does. So, and I don't know if you can attest if you've got any friends that use it as a tool like that. But I have many friends that use it as a tool, and I'm just very excited to be alive at a time where we're about to see this revolution. So
And when you started utilizing it as a tool, was that around the time? Because I know one of your first initial like investments within a company was into cannabis. So did you start using it as a tool when you were doing the research and preparing to make this investment? And I know like today we can get into it. You have an 8-part series on your YouTube channel that's like I think it's over 200 minutes long. The whole
that's one thing
series,
I
like
created this year out of
yeah.
it.
So it's like I know you've done like you've mentioned research, but like when you say you've done research, like over index in it research, like in the 1% of research on cannabis. But did you first start using it as a tool when you were initially researching it to make your big investment? I think it was a couple of years ago you would have made it.
Yeah, no. So that's the thing. Back then, I mean, just full story. I mean, full disclosure. Like I, growing up in Canada, again, you got introduced to cannabis at an early age, and I remember when I broke up with a girlfriend in high school, I was just devastated, and I kind of lost all my friends because I'd spent all my time with her. And I'm one of those people. Like when I focus on something, I put my energy into it, but then I kind of realized at the end, like, okay, I got to do that better. But so I met a new group of friends, and we started smoking. And it's funny because I smoked from 16 to 20 years old every single day, all the time. And that's what one thing why the topic in itself is a bit weird to me, because either I'm someone, and also I do have ADHD sort of tendencies. Like when I leave my house, I'd walk around the street to go catch the bus in the morning, and then realize, like, oh God, did I close the garage door? And I have to run, and I'd have to run back and check. And not to say I'm self-diagnosing myself, but I would just, there were a lot of these little things where I would notice that I would have to touch something multiple times. And so, using it in high school almost made me realize that like I was less uptight like that. So that was one interesting thing. I always just like, what the heck? Because if I were to say to my parents, oh, in Canada, it's not as common to get medicated because you can't sit still, right? But as a kid, you hear that in the US, Ritalin, all these pills. And, for some reason as a kid, I was like, well, I want to try a drug. That would be fun. Like, I'm so glad I never did. But so for me, it just didn't make sense. From 16 to 20, I got through university, consuming it. And it was just something that with my new group of friends I did. And it didn't make sense to me. Why is this illegal? And it made that all sort of just like, it just hung around in the background. But fundamentally, at that time in my life, when I needed to go to South Korea to teach English, they drug tested. Therefore, I quit to pass the drug test to carry on, right? It didn't become the cornerstone of my life. But then when I did come home from all the traveling, I was heartbroken because I essentially left a great relationship just because had no support system. I was by myself. I was scared in South Africa, and I just wasn't ready. And I came home, and that crushed me, like depression, um, excessive drinking, taking drugs and whatnot. And that's just when I started getting heavily into cannabis again. Uh, but then it sort of clicked, and it was like, okay, wow, interesting. So Canada's actually going to be legalizing this. Um, and just long story short, over time, I developed the ability to control myself. So like when you asked 2 years ago, was it me starting to use it? I was using it a lot. I'd go to work during the day, then I'd come home and smoke maybe a couple joints, just like someone would drink a beer a night. It did nothing to me, nothing bad to me, but that's how much I would use it back then. But I think that's also because there was a lot of truth that I was trying to run away from. The fact that I left a good relationship, the fact that maybe I just wasn't being honest with myself about all these different factors. Um, but so over time, and again, yeah, this wasn't overnight, but over time, I've gotten to a point where I now only need to use it, like I don't feel the need to do it, but it's there when I want. And that's just an incredibly sort of fulfilling place to end up with it, because yeah, again, like I've spent many years using it way more than I should have, but tremendously, man, is like 2019 all the way through that year, I was using it a ton. I still managed to do all this stuff. So it's absolute nonsense that you can't consume cannabis and not be productive. It's all stigma, and it's all a stereotype that had been created. Not to say that I want to test that or anything, but there's just more that we have to learn about this, because all of the research has been done on trying to find harms, and there have been countless studies over the last century, and there's zero evidence that cannabis is toxic for the human body, which is fascinating. And billions still get spent every year looking for harms when we should be focusing on the therapeutic remedies, right? And like the human body has the endocannabinoid system. We produce cannabinoid compounds ourselves. When our body is in homeostasis, when we're in balance, it's yeah. So long story short, I wasn't always like this, but yeah, no, I did always consume it, but it's almost just come to a point where I have control over it and it doesn't have control over me. So,
One thing that actually I've recently learned about a little bit, like not a ton, like very, very minimal amount, but building with hemp is something I find super interesting and just
oh,
all the things you could do with hemp.
I'm pretty
Um,
sure, sorry, don't mean to cut you off, but we could just replace coal with hemp. There's a process called pyrolysis where you burn the raw material and convert it into gas or liquid fuel. And if you just like, we do that with coal. If we switched coal for hemp, we'd have 100% clean renewable energy. But we've got big energy companies, we've got big oil companies, and we've got like a lot of these industries that would never allow that because that makes them obsolete. Yeah, dude, I'm fascinated, and that's kind of the goal for my future is like how can I educate the world on hemp and cannabis like properly because decades of propaganda has really just made a population sick of people that think you need to eat all day and just can't think for themselves anymore. So
mhm. And so talk to me about making that investment in cannabis when you were, I believe this was, again, like we talked a couple of years ago,
2018 was the summer. Yeah.
2018. So that was pre-legalization, right?
Yeah.
And so why did you feel that that was the right move? Because I know a lot of like, again, like full disclosure, anybody listening, like you've helped me set up my Quest trade. Like you kind of walked me through the process and like what
Right.
that looks like.
And so I
Um,
educated you on the fundamentals of exchange traded funds and REITs. So it's like, I showed you what everything is, and then it was you checking with me the right steps. So it's yeah, exactly. It's not me giving you advice. It's educating
correct.
you to put
Yeah.
into action, which I love and which I hope to do more of.
Yeah. But so I'm curious. So you when you initially taught yourself, one, how did you teach yourself to invest? Because like you talked about at the beginning, you got screwed over by that financial advisor with an O, and you
Yeah.
lost that couple hundred or $1,400.
Yeah.
So one, where did you go to teach yourself to learn everything about investing initially? And then once you make the move, like you're still investing in ETFs and everything, but you also started to invest in individual companies, and cannabis was where you went to.
Right.
Why did you go to cannabis? Was it just because of all the research and everything you've done? So kind of
Um,
a big question, but if you
yeah,
understand what
no,
I'm
I
saying.
can bring you through that. So no, not even. It was just so the way I saw it is that so the first book I think I read was Money Master the Game by Tony Robbins, and that introduces the concept of you don't need any sort of active management. All you need is an index fund or an exchange trade fund. Remember that got into my head after learning about the financial advisor hiccup, and then so from there I just started reading. Like I wasn't too, I'd started reading when I was abroad because I found books that I was interested in, and it wasn't the same as school where you're learning for the sake of reading things you're not interested in. I just started picking up reading books and then I started watching Warren Buffett videos on YouTube and things like that. It was just consuming content. Like I made it a priority in my life to watch investing content or to read investing books and to teach myself. Now, I made a terrible investment in the first place. So what I did was I knew that Canada was legalizing cannabis October 17th, 2018. And I thought, well, you know, if cannabis is illegal and then next year it's not, like there's going to be money made out of thin air. Like just the way I thought. Like it's just, well, if this happens and that happens, therefore that's going to happen. And now, funny in hindsight, just because of how terribly the government rolled out the process with regulations, opening stores to eliminate the black market, which is the whole reason for ending prohibition in the first place. Canada didn't do a very good job. But my thought process was, in the summer, I was going to invest, and then I was going to sell before legalization. Now, keep this in mind. I invested in the company that I invested in, Afria, and I'm still a shareholder in them today. But I invested in them at like $11.97 at a very high price point, a very high valuation, uh, and they were not worth that amount at the time. But I didn't understand what a market cap was. I didn't understand any of this. All I knew was that this industry is being created out of thin air. Therefore, I should be able to like make like I expected there to be hype from the summer into October. And there was. So in August of that same summer, I think I invested in June. I actually watched my investment go down and I was down about 5 grand. I was like, oh my God. And that's just the emotions that you have to convince yourself through. Because again, most people will invest and then they'll look at the price every day. But that doesn't matter. Ultimately you want to invest with some sort of inclination of why that price is going to go up. And if you don't invest in the first place. But the most important thing is looking at the market cap, what the whole company is valued at overall. And these were companies in Canada valued at 3 billion, 5, 10 billion. making 20 million a year in revenues because they were real companies, but they were serving a small Canadian medical market. Yet this entire adult recreational market was going to open up. But so in August, Constellation Brands, the company that owns Corona, Dos Equis, and a few of these, they invested $5 billion into Canopy Growth, the big name in Canada. So that caused Canopy overnight to increase in value by $5 billion. That's a lot. So like that's where if you're a $5 billion company and you're valued at $25 a share, if someone invests $5 billion in you overnight, you've become worth $10 billion because you've just gotten $5 billion cash. And that would make that 25 share price go up to 50 overnight. This things I didn't get, but I was lucky in my plan because a rising tide lifts all ships. So Canopy going up, Aurora started going up, Aphria, all these companies did. But here's where I screwed up is I got greedy. And I remember going to Barcelona and Andorra for like a 10-day vacation. And I remember saying to myself in the hotel room, Jordan, the day before legalization, you're going to sell because you don't know anything. And that was the plan. But, I got optimistic and I was like, they could keep going up, man. No, just wait. They're going to keep going up. And if you understand anything about fundamentals, there was no chance, not a chance in the world. But, that was a learning lesson because fundamentally though, I never sold. I wrote it up and I'd made about 11 grand over that period. And so how I invested in the first place was risky technically, but I had a home equity line of credit, or not a home equity, just a line of credit. And I had a very low interest rate because I keep a good credit score because I'm money conscious. So I was getting, 25 grand offered at 3% interest. So I sent 12,500 of this credit into my TFSA and invested with that. Now, it wasn't that risky because I had a bunch of cash in my checking account. So worst case scenario, I could just pay that off. But the plan was obviously to double my money with other people's money and then just, pay that off. I never ended up doing that. So what I did was overcomplicate it for myself, but fundamentally I just didn't sell and I held all the way through. And then shortly after legalization happened and the prices just kept falling, there was actually a short report. And a short report is when a company or when a hedge fund typically finds a company that they believe is hyping up their value is not actually worth what they claim to be worth. And so Aphria, which was my biggest investment, they were attacked by a short report. So, from that point, I'd seen my stock fall so much, the share price dropped from like 8 where it was at all the way down to $5. And I was sitting there holding at $11.97. Like, what the heck? What's going on? The short report, though, claimed that this company was worth $0 because they had bought in some inflated assets in Latin America, which they did. But I did know, because I'd done the research, is that they're not worth $0. They have an established medical business in Canada. So honestly, it was one of those where I could have sold then and been really, really bitter, but I just held on and I just paid attention every single day. I have a job where I work on the computer. Therefore, I can check different things on different websites to see what's happening with these companies. And it wasn't until 2019 when I sort of just got over that whole, like I was sick to my stomach, realizing what I had missed out on. But instead of beating myself up over it, I figured, try and learn from it. So that's where I stopped focusing on cannabis because I knew that, look, in time, it's going to get back. Right now, what do I have and what do I know that's good? I have a job. Therefore, I'm going to be making money every month. So I don't need to ever sell this. And that's sort of where my brand, Make More Capital, was created because I started, focusing more on what does the beginner need to actually learn? I jumped way ahead and jumped right into stocks. What do I have? And that's where I came up with the, really getting into, ETFs, index funds, long-term, this is how you want to use them. The tax-free savings account is literally the best kept secret in Canada. In the US, it's the Roth IRA. And you can contribute money into this account, invest with it, and build money tax-free that way. And so, basically it was that whole year of being in the red and whatnot just made me focus on, I took my attention away from it and focused on other things to get creative. But I still knew in the background that this is going to come, this is going to happen. And it's been a slow process, but so in Canada, as of this year, so let me just, in 2019, Canada brought in $1.2 billion in revenue in cannabis. And this is, again, with 25 brick and mortar stores in our most populated province of Ontario that has 14.5 million people. How do you cut out the black market if you open 25 stores? You can't, right? So, but the one thing that Ontario has done this year, and at least like it was this summer that it came full circle and I was ready and I was like, okay, you know what, Jordan, everything that you thought is going to happen. And that's what gave me the confidence to make the series when I did and kind of just try to call it and be historically correct because I'd been through it all. And I was like, I'm either right or I'm not. And, you know, I've thankfully been fairly accurate in at least what's happening in Canada. And, you know, the US is going to take more time, but we're getting there. And the numbers at least are there. But so in Canada, in 2019, Canada brought in 1.2 billion. This year, they're on pace to bring in 2.6 billion. So that is 100% plus growth from 1 year, which is quite good looking at any industry. But Ontario, in September of 2020, announced they're going from opening 20 stores a month to 40 a month. And then in December, they've announced going from 40 stores to 80 a month. So where they're opening 20 stores in Ontario a month, they're now opening 80. So like at the end of September, there was only 183 stores. Again, where there's 14.5 million people. When you do the math, I'm like stores per capita, that makes zero sense. But fundamentally though, when you get down to it, by December 2021 next year, Ontario is going to have over 1,300 stores for people to actually access it and take money out of the black market finally and put it into the pockets of investors, the government, shareholders, companies, things like that. But so, sorry, I know that answer was all over the place, but I started with cannabis. Then I really focused on the brand for other people. But now I've really realized that, like, okay, it's a very difficult thing to teach people how to manage their money because it's more psychology and human behavior than anything, right? And, you know, if someone's not ready to be honest with themselves, they probably shouldn't invest, sadly. But that's where, you know, I've come full circle. And now I'm like, okay, yeah, cannabis is where I really want to focus on because no one's doing it. So I see the niche there. I have the background from watching the industry for 3 years. And again, I'm in the middle of the process. And I like creating the content, putting out the videos twice a week. And I'll be doing that until legalization. So it's just funny how this whole thing, and sorry, I guess I might have skipped over, like, how did I know that cannabis would work? It's just my experience growing up. How is this thing, you know, been illegal forever? You know, it doesn't do anything bad to me. It just, I always thought I'm curious about this. I think there's more to it. And I'm just glad I went with my gut and didn't kind of succumb to what you should do.
My question is kind of jumping back a little bit, but it's
Yeah.
with Make More Capital. Why did you decide to start in the first place? Why did you decide to make it your mission to educate Millennial and Gen Z how to properly invest their money?
So that was a big gap that I noticed as well in just the education. You know, I thought this whole issue with the financial advisor could have been avoided had I known a little bit more about how to invest or what even the TFSA was and whatnot. So I'm glad you asked that because in the summer of 2019, what I was actually doing was going to high school. Well, the summer I'd spent a lot of time writing up a presentation to go to high schools and present and teach financial literacy. So that was where I kind of had really the idea of Make More Capital. Firstly, was just to show people that investing wasn't that difficult, and it was like a way for me to document what I was learning and share with others. So that's what started it. And then it was January 2019 when I got this idea to write an ebook. Um, Even though I technically was like the worst investor ever with my track record, but I mean, like, I also like I jumped over this part. But in 2017, my first investment in Aurora Cannabis, I made $1,200 in 2 weeks. And so it was just one of those where, like, you know, I'd seen all these different things work and I knew that it could work. You just had to have the basic underlying. So like Make More Capital started with the blog, then the IG account, then the ebook, then the presentations to go to schools, then in the fall of 2019, actually going to schools to give these presentations, then, you know, planning to, you know, quit my job and be my own boss and go to companies and pitch to them why they need some sort of financial education because it's the biggest stressor. And then COVID hits. So that whole idea is shut out the door. And I don't know, I guess the whole idea is like, I never necessarily had a sound business plan in general, but I just started doing all of this. And I just thought like at the time there wasn't a huge personal finance community, so I could capitalize on that on Instagram. And yeah, I guess it was just that once I learned that this wasn't that complicated and that I wasn't dumb, I just had bad math teachers growing up. It changed, and I was just like, "Yo, people should know this." And you know, I'm happy to say that I've helped a lot of people. I mean, even you get started invested. I've helped a lot of friends. I've helped a lot of people just get over fundamentally blocks that they just created for themselves because of like sort of bad or because of past beliefs, you know.
Mhm. And so like long term, how does make more capital make money for you? Because right now, like when we work together, it was completely free. Like how in the long term, like how does it work? Like can you legally charge people for the services you provide? Like what does this all look like?
No, yeah, so that's a good idea, and that's what I've come to realize over time is that make more capital as a business idea to like sustainably make me money is a lot more difficult than I thought at the beginning. But I'm glad I just tried stuff and I didn't think too much about it, you know, from the get go. So again, you know, after I had to regroup because of the coronavirus, um, I made like a coaching sort of business, and I tried that and it didn't work. You know, I'm glad I tried it, but it didn't make me much money. And essentially, though, like what I like, Jacob, what I taught you, would you say that long over the long run, like you would consider paying $1,000 up front for what I taught you?
I think that would be a hard $1,000 for me to spend. Like I think going through it, I understand, but I think if you'd up front me like it's a grand, I'd be like, I don't think I could do this right
Of
now.
course.
Like, yeah.
And that's what I realized. So like honestly, like how do I plan to make money from this in the future? I don't, you know, I'm making enough. My plan is to just make enough money investing myself. Um, and so I guess that's a good way to kind of get to where we are now is like, I'm actually going to be turning Make More Capital into cannabis industry, like cannabis media. And that's just something that I think over the long term, as it becomes more popular, and I'm going to be shifting from Instagram to YouTube because long term, I think it's a much better platform. Um, it's more of a search engine than anything. So once people start getting more curious about cannabis, I know they're going to start searching up cannabis in YouTube, and thankfully, I'm covering a lot of those keywords that will likely lead them to find me. So that's a good thing. And then, but no, yeah, like fundamentally, what I've done with you, it's not going to make me money long term. It's not sustainable, and I've learned that. But it's a skill that I know, and you know, me helping you out, I figure in the future you're going to help me out with something. And fundamentally, it's me just doing favors for friends at the beginning. But I mean, it's my TikTok account that's made me money on sponsorship deals this year, and I know we haven't even talked about that. But what's funny is like the most success I've actually had on social, just in reference to this entire sort of theme, was like this year on TikTok. I guess my content has done favorably there, so I've been able to grow that community the most. And then I've had brands actually reach out. For example, Anchor, the host of my podcast, they've reached out and I've made some ads for them. And I've been able to make some ads for other companies. So I've only actually made money by using my TikTok platform to actually promote these other tools that I use myself. So, you know, as someone that claims like I have side hustles, they don't necessarily make me money. That's why I've kept my job this whole time. But, you know, no reason not to start. And like, you know, it's a work in progress. And over time, you start to figure out what the pieces are and can bring them together to make them work. So,
Mhm. I do actually want to talk about your TikTok, so I'm glad you brought that up.
yeah, no worries.
Before I have one question before that though. So with terms of making money with Make More Capital, could you in theory go through the training and become a financial like you becoming the thing you hate, but becoming a financial advisor with an O so that you can legally charge for it, but maybe like you could drop your fees really low to like you could do like a 0.01001% just to show them how to do it. Is there any way you could make money that way?
No, it's not possible because it's not like any individual sales rep can drop their fee. It's all cookie cutter. You're either someone that's going to be a puppet for the industry and over your lifetime become so money obsessed or like, you know, just become so sort of wired and addicted to money that you're never going to question like because think about this. Financial advisors, they don't get paid like who pays for their bonus or their commission over time? It's the clients. It's not the institution, right? So the structure has allowed it so that the institution can pay these financial advisors and sales reps the bare minimum. But the way that they guarantee their retirement is by keeping their clients invested over the long run. So like you can't literally be a like it's funny because in 2018 my friend became a financial advisor with one of the financial services companies, and after 2 years or after 2 months he quit. He's like, hey, I can't sell this garbage to people. Like this is insane. And that's almost one of the ideas where I was like, people need an account like Make More Capital. But like that's the thing. You take this exam to become a financial advisor. You don't need to know anything about money. That's what was most misleading to me. As someone that got wronged by this financial advisor, I was just naive and literally thought this guy picked the investments for me. I thought this guy does nothing. He gets your money into the pool, and then the fund manager. So like you know, a few more people are getting paid the commission as well. So it's crazy when you think that the financial advisor they have to be blind to what the fees actually do over time if they want to retire, which is just crazy. And I just can't fundamentally do that to people. I'm also realized like I'm technically one of those like unemployables where you know, a lot of things I just won't put up with because I see right through it. I'm like, no, that's terrible, or no, I wouldn't stand for that. And what's funny is when you talk to any financial advisor and you try to you try to debate them or whatnot, bring this up, they basically like they're not even arguing fundamentally over like what the fee does over the long run. They're just going to try to tell you why mutual funds are better for you, and they're not. Like fundamentally, as long as you just never sell when you're down, you can't go wrong with an ETF yourself. It's the way the structure is set up, and you know, I wouldn't be able to get in there and change anything. They'd fire me right away. And
Interesting.
yeah, and that's what's interesting though, is like in Canada, we're either too nice. We've never said, excuse me, we've never said anything. But like, why have the fees not come down? Because they don't have to. That's the reality.
Mhm. And just for context too, what is an ETF?
So an ETF is an exchange traded fund. So an ETF is basically an asset management company will create it and then they will put it on a stock exchange. And what's inside of it is pieces of many different companies to reduce the risk. So it's an already diversified fund that takes away a lot of the risk because there's so many companies inside of it already. But what it does is it puts it on the exchange so that you yourself can buy it directly. Now, the biggest difference is that most mutual funds are actively managed. So the selling point is that, oh, don't like we're gonna buy and sell daily frequently to try and beat the market for you. When as the ETF, for the most part, there are active ETFs, but like an S&P ETF, for example, like the most basic one, it's passive. So at no point does any owner, like nothing inside changes it. They make it one day and they just let it run over time. And so where the financial advisor sales rep gets people is that they'll say, "Oh, no, no, but we're going to do better. Like we're going to beat the market for you. And like this way, we're not going to get too risky so that when when the markets go down, you don't go down as much as the markets do." And I mean, when fundamentally, if you look at the data, active managers historically do not beat the market at all. There's Wealthsimple has a good thing that they put on their site from J.P. Morgan in 2008, where you measure the performance of the S&P, and this accounts for the 2000 tech bubble, the 2008 Great Recession, not what happened earlier in March though. It accounts for those two down years. The S&P 500 returned 7.3%, and active managers over the last 20 years returned 2.6%. Because again, what you need to account for is over long periods of time. Because if you're going to invest properly, you're starting and you're not selling all of that for 30 years, right? You want to keep it in there for 30, even 40. The longer you keep it in there, the better. But active managers, they might be able to beat the market 1 year, 2 years in a row, but there's no way over a 10-year period they're averaging anything close to the market. Because when the market will without a doubt have a couple bad years here and there, and it's the cycle of the market and it'll drop. But like as long as you fundamentally know, just like, hey, as long as you balance your cash well enough and don't overextend yourself in debt with a couple mortgages and car leases that you don't necessarily need, if you just balance your cash well enough so that in those dark times you never have to sell a passive ETF that's just tracking the market, you will always get much better results by just again, like, so the process of dollar cost averaging, like, well, sorry, I'll start that from paying yourself first. So every month when you get paid, you send a little bit of money from your checking account into that tax-friendly account. Then every single month, you just buy 100 worth of shares in, say, an ETF or an index fund or a couple hundred worth, and then you just let compound interest do the rest and reinvest dividends. It's going to get better than these active managers with that 2.5% fee. And the other thing I should stress is that these these passive ETFs, the MER, do you remember what the MER is on the ETF that you invested in?
Believe it's like point something, like point
Point zero
0.5,
nine probably, or
0.09.
point zero
Yeah.
0.08, right?
Yeah.
So when you add up 0.08 over 30 years, you're getting like 3-4%, something tiny. When you add up that 2.5 over 30 years, would you rather lose 60% of your nest egg and need the gains to really like gains to be in the thousands past to make up for it, or do you want to only lose 3 to 4%? Like, it's just, people get sold by these financial advisors because they have the big institutions behind them, and that's what makes these people feel comfortable enough to invest with them. not understanding how they work. And so, I mean, I know that was a complicated answer, but the exchange traded fund is a new passive vehicle that is low cost because of that low MER, that is diversified, so you don't need to worry about owning too many other funds in that are similar to it. It's the new best asset class for anyone in 2020.
Who makes the ETFs? Because with the MER, so for example, I looked at the ZSP and they have $8.9 billion in that fund. And correct me if any of the information I'm saying right now is completely incorrect, but so ZSP, they have $8.9 billion in their fund with a
So,
0.08 MER.
right.
So
And sorry, I mean 8.8 billion in assets under management or 8.8 billion in
that's a very good
invested.
question. I just
Yeah,
put in the fund. I think, yeah, I'll just search up quickly where I got that
that's okay.
number.
Because I mean, like, yeah, you could have $8.8 billion of people's money total invested in the fund. And then I think that would be assets under management. But so the ZSP, for example, and again, this is not advice, but just explaining how it is. ZSP is a BMO S&P 5. Yeah, is the BMO S&P 500 ETF. I don't know why I can't say that properly in a single sentence. But so BMO makes that. BMO creates that ETF. One day they create it and then they just put it on the exchange so that anyone can buy it themselves. And then they just let it grow over time. And I mean, the whole goal for that is just that um, as people wake up to how much better ETFs are of an asset vehicle than active mutual funds, um, they just hope that over time with the amount of people investing in that, they're going to make enough with 0.08 annually with everybody. But again, they don't start really making money once you're 20 to 40 years down the line of your investment, right? Because if you've only invested 1,000, you're paying 8 cents. Like that's how cheap that 0.08 is. But yeah, so it's the asset management company that makes it. They actually pay what's called the management fee, but then you pay that small MER that's left over. And that's just what the difference is. These active mutual funds with financial advisors, they'll charge that fee, that 2.5 MER, and that goes to pay their salary, that goes to pay the fund managers. There can also be trailing fees. There could be front end or back end fees too. It's just a mess. It's a recipe for disaster.
Mhm. Changing gears here a little bit. Can you talk to me about tying your shoe?
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad that you asked that because what's funny is literally the one video that made my TikTok blow up has nothing to do with what I even talk about on TikTok. And I've yet to be able to find a sweet spot and replicate that video. Um, but yeah, so far to date, I think I have over 700,000 views on that one post. Um, Basically, it was me seeing the hashtag. I was today years old when I learned, and the day before, I had had a tutoring session with having the English experience during the year. One way I was making a little bit of side money is teaching English online. Um, and so my student had mentioned that he found out what the hole on the beside the ankle of your shoe is supposed to be used for, and I had no idea. So he sent me the video. The next morning, it was one of the most or one of the quickest videos that I put the least amount of thought into. It was just like, I'm going to go for a run and I'm going to film myself saying, I was 27 years old, or I was today years old when I found out how this hole is supposed to work. And it's a 15-second clip and it blew up. It's just, that's so important and reminds you, I don't overthink and stop yourself from posting something that can do great. And really just like, no one cares what you're putting out for the most part. It's so easy to think that someone is going to attack you for what you do. If it's good, people are going to like it. If it's not, someone might comment something nasty, but that's more of a reflection of how insecure they are with themselves than with what your content might have to relate to, of course. I mean, unless you're posting something that's not, in bad taste, but never would have expected that, man.
So is that a little bit discouraging though? With you put out all of this content around a specific subject, this is what you're building your life around, and then the video of you tying your shoe is what pops off. Not any of the probably hundreds of other pieces of content at this point that you've posted. It's the shoe tying one that pops. Like, is that discouraging at all in a little bit, in a little way?
I guess it is, but I never thought of it that way.
Well, shit. Well,
Um,
then I apologize for pointing it out in that light.
yeah, no, that's okay. I mean, no, honestly, I never did think of it as discouraging. It was amazing. I was like, what the fuck? Sorry, but like 700, 500, like within a few days, what, 100,000 people have watched this video? Like I had Puberty on Instagram, all these accounts reaching out, hey, can we feature this thing? People reaching out, hey, you're famous. Like, what? It was more or less like if anything of my motto this year, man, don't set expectations because then you can't be disappointed. Honestly, no, yeah, I never really thought twice about it. It was more just that I was happy with it, and I just decided to keep going with what I was posting. But no, you're right because I've got a few friends that I've networked and met with, and like we talked about comedy earlier. That's something I would love to do in time. Like, why don't I do that right now? I could, and I could probably make some really funny stuff, but I guess I'm too attached to this financial, like, education identity, and I need to get away from that. But no, that's a good question, man, because I really should probably start thinking about different ways to incorporate just fun stuff, funny content in general. But I haven't, and I've probably missed out on a lot for not doing that. So, you know, I'm glad that you asked that because I hadn't thought about it, but I think if I were to get discouraged, that would really take away from why I'm on there in the first place. So.
And so, kind of high level, what does the Make More Capital highly invested Jordan Hiley strategy look like right now on social media?
It's just the guy setting an example for other people. It's me documenting the journey. So like I've got goals that I've set that I think are quite realistic. So like I want to have 100,000 net worth by 30, and I'm 28, and I have about six. Like if my investment portfolio is at about 50,000 right now. Um, I'm at like 60K net worth, so there's no reason I can't get to 100,000 by 30. I should get there much sooner. Um, and then 500,000 by 35, and then a million by 40. That would be ideal. And I don't know how I'm going to get there, but the thought process is that over time, if I just keep showing up and posting one podcast episode a week, I will get there. And thankfully, that and TikTok has brought me my first marketing opportunity with Anchor. So it's one of those things where like, hey, if I never started, I'd never know. So I'm glad I did. Make More Capital on YouTube. The whole idea is that eventually, in time, like I mentioned, I'll be able to monetize that channel so that can make me money. Just as cannabis, as we change the narrative overall with cannabis, which is great. And then in just investing myself, like I do fundamentally believe that we're going to see a cannabis boom in the next few years, especially when the US finally legalizes it. Just because there's so many factors that can't be ignored any longer, which is jobs, tax revenue. It's an essential business. The fact that its classification as a Schedule 1 substance means that there's no medical use whatsoever. Yet at the same time, it's legal in 38 states. It just makes democracy look stupid. And so I'm hoping that because politicians have to run on the fact that we're going to legalize cannabis so that the people will actually vote them in. If you get to that point, you can't ignore it. Like the market speaks so loud, right? So I'm just set up for success in the next few years. All I got to do is wait for that. I've got some ideas down the pipeline, potentially creating a character and through that character, educating the world on cannabis and hemp. I'm not sure, I'm still writing that, but that's something I'm working on. Hopefully my series on cannabis, like it's an amazing series. And anyone that I know that have watched it has said like, dude, this is amazing. Just, I almost do too much that I don't know how to get that in front of people's eyes. Right. So I don't know, man. I'm lucky to say that I've really just gotten back to enjoying the process. And that's just where I'm at right now. And I'm not setting too many expectations. I'm going to let that eventually come together, but just the personal brand, I guess.
Fair enough. And I have three other investment things I want to we'll do them like almost rapid fire if that works for you. We're just going to quick hits because I feel like people listening to this, if they're listening, curious about the investment side, they'll probably be curious about these things. So one, quick thoughts on real estate.
It's a great investment. It's a great vehicle over time. It's made a ton of people a lot of money. Just if you're buying a house to live in it yourself and to pay the mortgage yourself, that is not an asset. That is a liability. And, it's true though that you can just sell the house and get cash and make that an asset and make it an investment. You can do that. But the best way to consider using real estate is to, instead of, most people that get married and they want to buy a house, right? Them and their husband or, them and their partner will likely get the biggest possible house that their mortgage can cover, right? And it's just the way, the people selling you the mortgage, they want you to get a bigger mortgage because they're going to get a bigger cut off of that mortgage, right? And what that does though, is that overextends people buying one property that they're paying the mortgage every single month when you could also realistically get a much smaller property and a rental property for that same value of mortgage. And if you were to do that instead, then you're literally paying rent and living, and then you've got another rental property that's potentially cash flowing to cover that. Like there's just many, many ways to go about it. But anyone that thinks, buying a house and then living in it for 30 years is an investment, it's a liability until you've seen the return on it. It's a big opportunity cost. So I just want people to know that. And real estate's great, but it's not the same as 1970, 1980 when our parents were in it. And so I just caution people, don't overextend yourself, because if this year's taught us anything, if you have too much debt and you lose your job, the creditors might give you 6 months if it's a global situation, but they're going to come for that money eventually. So it's just super important not to overextend yourself with too big of a mortgage. Like try to aim small and try to get that cash flow.
Crypto/Bitcoin?
Yeah. Oh, all the way. I own Bitcoin. I own Ethereum. I own a few other coins. Not a whole lot of money in it, maybe a couple grand invested. But long term, I see Bitcoin as the new digital gold. And it's more of a collector's item than anything. But I don't think people really realize how big of a thing Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is for 80% of the population that lives on less than $2 a day. Like that is where people think of all the wealthy people who just use it as a store of value, and they will. And the more that the US government prints money as if there's no like long-term effect of that, more money is going to go into crypto. And as we've seen it hit all-time highs this past week. But blockchain, the technology underneath it, that's the most important thing to understand. And Ethereum is another one that I own quite a bit. Sorry, I know you wanted to make this rapid fire, but just I think long-term it's going to increase in value. Just don't I'm invested in it. That's all I can say. But it's more of a speculative play. Yeah.
Last one. This is more of a personal one. And this was kind of like my mindset before starting to invest. What would the argument be if someone was like, I want to invest money, but why should I invest it in someone else's company? Should I just invest it and start my own company? Couldn't that return faster?
No. Yeah, no, I mean, if they have experience, it's possible. But the easiest way to grow money is through equity. There's no easier way to increase the value of your money very quickly than owning equity. And that involves you trading your cash for share ownership.
This is kind of taking a complete jump question here. Can you talk to me about your relationship with Scott Birdie?
Yeah, man. Dude's my best friend. And he's helped me out a ton in many ways. And I've known him my whole life pretty much. And when I was in South Korea, I went to go visit him when he was in Australia. So that was one thing where like him and I got to connect on the other side of the planet, and we're just like, what is life, man? How cool. And I'm really happy to announce that him and I are actually going to be working together in the new year on a new project as well. So, um, Scott is just one of the best characters I know, and that's probably why I've gravitated so closely to him over time. And he's just one of those friends that when I didn't get to see him, it felt like nothing had passed. And he was one of those guys that motivated me to become a better version of myself. And before I knew it, he's telling me that I'm an inspiration for him. And I'm like, dude, I'm doing this all because like you. I think everyone needs a friend like that in their life that motivates them and that pushes them to be better. And it's funny because we actually started, really what got us onto social media was this idea to create an account called Travel for World Change. I'd forgotten about that, but man, yeah, in early February 18, this was before I even started investing. This was when I invested, but I didn't know what I was doing. And him and I grew that travel account just to, for the first time, use social media as a creator instead of a consumer. And it was a great experience. We grew the account to about 4,000 over 6 months. It wasn't easy. And it was necessary for him and I to do that. And we got to a point where we were like, okay, this is a bit too difficult. Let's just stop this and work on our own things. And that's when Scott went on to do TrueFan. And I went on to working the same job I am now, but, just doing things over time and slowly adding to the asset class in the background. And now it's come full circle. And again, we get to work on this new project in the new year, which is really cool. And we get to create, which is amazing. So, yeah, he's just the best kind of guy ever. Smart, passionate, doesn't lie to himself either. It's so important to, be thoughtful, be aware. And he's one of those guys that I've learned a lot from. And, that quote, I forget who said it, but you become the closest people that you hang around. It's just like, it rings true, man. So try to find yourself someone like Scott. Do you mind? So tell us a little bit about your relationship with him.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my business today can trace back to Scott Birdie. because a majority of my clients today have been referred through TrueFan. And I started working with TrueFan because of Scott. And like Scott, like the first person now that I think about it, where I really realized like that this is an opportunity was sitting at a coffee shop with Scott, and Scott just laying out like how much I can realistically charge to do what I do. And then how many clients I would actually need to just do it as my job. And so like Scott is someone like we met through OSEG when he actually came in to pitch. He pitched me TrueFan. I was in the meeting where he was like selling. It was like me and two other people, and like he was selling us TrueFan. Then him and I just kind of connected through that and stayed in touch. And then like we would meet up for coffee when he'd come back to town. And then yeah, ultimately like we just stayed in touch. And I had him on my podcast as well. And we had it was like one of my longest episodes ever, which I'm sure this one's actually close to the similar length that I had with Scott. But yeah, we just stayed in touch and kept meeting up every time he was back in town. And then eventually like he asked me how the business was going. And I was like, yeah, here, just kind of started it. And he's like, well, write me up a proposal and I'll like send it through on our end and I'll see what I can do. And then from there, like it got pushed through, and pretty much every client other than one since then has come as a referral through TrueFan. So it's like a lot of where my business today can be traced back to Scott.
That's amazing, man. Like, yeah. I just, all my life, like that guy's, yeah, great dude. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
It's okay. My other question to you, kind of getting into the wrapping up, is how often do you reflect on how far you've come? When you flash back to that guy that coincidentally bumped into a friend on the bus that ultimately led to you traveling to Thailand, which led to you teaching in South Korea, like how often do you reflect on this entire journey that you've been on over the last 8-9 years?
Um, Probably like every day. Like, it's just as corny as this sounds, and a lot of everything I'm almost getting it from other podcasts because they've given me the words that I didn't have words for myself. But it is practicing gratitude. It is being grateful. It's just like, look how far you've come, and it hasn't always looked this good for me. Even in the summer, I was still doubting my cannabis investments. I'm like, man, what if this never happens? What if this doesn't work out? And a lot of that is just you create it in your own mind, right? So I do think it is important to just almost every day be like, wow, I'm really lucky where I am. Count inventory of your friends, your family. Writing in the morning. Some days where it's not creative writing, it will be journaling, and I'm writing that out. But the more often the more you can incorporate gratitude into your life or into your daily routine, um, I think the more you'll see the good in what you've been able to accomplish than what you're lacking.
My last question before we get into the wrap up, this is one thing Scott said. Maybe throw this question out there and see what you say. Is in what ways are you similar to your dad?
um, it's a great question. I'm I'm loyal, I'm consistent, and gritty. I think that's a good way to put it. Um, and I think maybe at the end of the day is I'll do what needs to get done, whether I like it or not. Because if it's something that I want deep down enough, and I want to be my own boss, and I want to, have fuck you money so that I can do cool stuff and inspire people, and that's what I want deep down. And so I think fundamentally, taking all emotions out of it, yeah, it's just the fact that I've come to a point, and I've learned this from him. He was a good leader for me growing up in some ways, but it's oh my god, what a good question. It's just whether you like it or not, you do it because that's what your job is, or that's what you want.
The last question, I like to flip the script a little bit. So instead of me asking the question, it's you asking the question, but it's not to me. So pretend you have a crystal ball. You can ask this crystal ball any question, you'll get the 100% honest answer. What is one question you want to know the answer to?
Mm. Oh, that's a hard one. I almost wish you were just giving me a way to think about this ahead of time. Um, well, because I don't want to copy anyone else, but I mean, the biggest, easiest question I could think of and just point to is Elon's question. But I don't want to copy that. Do you know what Elon's question
No,
is?
I don't even know what Elon's question is.
What's outside the simulation?
Okay.
So, like, what is outside of all this? But no, fundamentally I'm curious. I'd love to know, but no, like, I just do. Man, that's such a hard question to ask on the spot. Um, but like, if I had a crystal ball and I can get one honest answer, man, it's such a hard question.
It is. And I normally build up to it like a couple more like questions, like a little bit deeper questions. So you're in that mindset. But I know we've been over like 2 hours here. So I was jumping to it. But if
Because like I don't even want to ask what's the meaning of life or anything, because I don't think that's an important one, but more just like, yeah, I wish I could have something really clever and whatnot, but I don't. Sorry.
That's okay, man. That's all good. Some people like I've
Oh,
had
you know what? It'd
someone.
just be, am I on the right track? Should I keep trusting my gut? That'd probably be it. Because you know what? It took me a long time to start trusting myself again, because I thought people knew what was better for me than I did myself. But after this year of like, no, Jordan, just do what you think is best because this is what you ultimately want down the line. Should I keep trusting my gut?
I love it, man. But I want to thank you so much for taking time to be on this podcast. I want to give you the floor. Where can the people find you? Plug anything and everything you got right now.
Thank you, Jacob. Well, this will be difficult. First place, easiest place is probably Instagram or TikTok or YouTube. But firstly, Instagram is Make More Capital, and YouTube is Make More Capital. You can find me on TikTok at Highly Invested, HIGHLEY, because it's my last name. And then you can also find my podcast, Highly Invested, by Googling that, or you can find that in Anchor. Otherwise, you can send me an email at makemorecapital@gmail.com. And I'll respond to anything. So
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below so that people can find you. I want to thank you once again for taking time to be on this podcast. And I want to thank everybody for listening, whether you listen the entire way through or you only listen to bits and pieces. I really appreciate you taking time to check this out. Everyone do me a big favor. Go and follow Jordan. Go and check out Make More Capital. Subscribe to Highly Invested. Like I said, I'll make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below so you can find it. If you like to follow me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. If you like to follow the podcast, you can find us on Instagram at My Social Life Podcast or YouTube by searching up My Social Life. As always, today's podcast is powered by TrueFan. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.